Hello there, and welcome this week to Talking Flutes Extra with me, Jean-Paul Wright. The opening theme tune, as always, was The Baby Elephant Walk by Henry Mancini, played by the brilliant Barry Griffiths. A huge shout out must go to our loyal sponsors, TJ Flutes, who have been with us since we began on our podcast journey nearly 6 years ago. You can show them some flute love by visiting tjflutes.com or by following them on Instagram and TikTok at TJ Flutes and Facebook at Trevor James Flutes. Barry Griffiths is a British flute player and Instagram artist who over the years has won scholarships to study at both Chatham School of Music and the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. As an orchestral player, he has played under many critically acclaimed conductors. However, having worked extensively with music technology over the years, Barry has deviated off now and specialises in recording, performing and creating unique arrangements for the flute family repertoire, with his growing community of social media viewers lapping up all these wonderful arrangements and recordings on an almost daily basis. Please give a warm Talking Flutes welcome to the brilliant Barry Griffiths.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm very well. You got your coffee there, sir?
Yes, I do, and I very much require it this morning.
Explain to me what's on that mug. You got owls or birds or something?
Owls. Yes, it's my favourite mug.
Well, I'm just on the little red cup. He talks like that on Instagram.
He's a geezer.
He's a geezer. Well, welcome, Barry. You are one of our most requested previous podcast guests because, as I said in my intro, you started out as very much a classical musician and you've deviated off through your love for technology and you've married that in with social media. And not only have you become an influencer, people actually, they're lapping up everything you do, especially now you've got into arranging as well. Where did this actually begin?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I love doing these, and yeah, for that, when I started playing on Instagram, it was mostly for my own benefit, being able to see my own playing, iron out, sort of technical things, and just be able to see it. It adds a completely different element to it. But then people started to enjoy it. And, I was really surprised for that and honored that people were actually listening to my content first and foremost. So, yeah, obviously I was doing a lot of classical works and solos and things like that. But then I started to deviate a little bit and experiment and see if I could cross those interests, because I knew that there were certain interests that wouldn't necessarily align, or at least I thought that they wouldn't. And it turns out that they do. Which I'm really thankful for. Eventually, I gained the confidence to play more film music and video game music and create arrangements for them, and people enjoyed them. And I realized that I really enjoyed making those, because I didn't really realize. I just knew that I had an interest with them.
The thing is, you start doing things for your own self-worth. So you put stuff up, as you said, to seeing how it sounds and to iron out all these little things.
Yeah.
And then you get an audience. That audience is because of the way social media works. It's an interaction thing, isn't it? And then you start creating things for others. That's when the difficulty occurs, because you start creating things, and because your ears are getting better and you're wanting to put more stuff out, it does tend to become slightly more complicated.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because you want to put things out for others, and you take requests and things like that. But it's balancing that with what you want to do on a given day as well. There'll be days where I wake up and I don't really know what I'm going to record or put out. And it's a surprise to me by the end of the day. But then that's also the part of the beauty in it, but definitely it has transitioned to more of a sense of community more than anything else, and in some ways it's collaborative in that manner, like because I'm always asking, please leave suggestions, because there's always going to be something that crops up there and be like, actually that's a brilliant idea, or that would work fantastically.
So
Yeah.
are you still doing it for Barry, or because you have such a large following, are you now sort of doing it sort of 50% for your audience, or is it still totally for you?
I think that the community is a great thing, and like having that there, is why you keep coming back, because it's just such a positive environment. But ultimately, I think you have to still do it completely for yourself, because then what you're giving out and your intention then is genuine, is you.
That's the most important thing, being genuine, being honest.
Yeah.
Barry, should we go straight in? We've got lots of questions that have been sent in, because people get quite excited when I sometimes tell people in advance who we've got on. So I'd like to interact some of your pieces with questions. I've asked you for 5 or 6 pieces, and you've sent me them in, really interesting ones as well. And I'd like to start with the one that actually, we posted it on our Facebook page and it went bananas. Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, end credits. Why choose this one, Barry, apart from the fact that everybody loves it?
This one is one that I chose, and it's purely for myself. I love these films. I'm a Trekkie. It's one of my favorite films of all time. I love the soundtrack. James Horner is just a genius. This is one of his first like real high-end gigs as well, and he absolutely nailed it. But just everything about this film I absolutely adore, and the process of creating it from start to finish was just a love letter to it.
So let's listen to Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, end credits, arranged by Barry and also played on every instrument you hear on the next recording is actually Barry playing, and we'll speak about the construction of that in a bit. So here we go. love that one. It's a feel-good one, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
How many instruments are you playing there?
So that is the full range. That's from piccolo, the copper body concert flute, the copper body alto flute, and the bass flute.
And within there, there's you've doubled up on a few things as well, haven't you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there's multiple of each. Yeah, absolutely.
So what people will need to realise here is that Barry's actually written it as a flute choir.
Yeah.
But that's fantastic. I really, really like that. And that gives a really good indication of where you have sort of deviated away from the classical. But as we'll hear with some other pieces, you stay within that genre. So it's quite interesting crossover.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our first question from an Amy Zeitner in New York. And she says, can you ask, I like this, she didn't put Barry. She put your your online name, which is Grizzly Flute, at Grizzly Flute. And most of you listening to this will know that Barry has a beard, and there's probably a grizzly bear type influence there. But Amy writes, can you ask Grizzly Flute how he structures his arrangement process after he has decided what he is going to record? What does he do first?
Well, first of all, with regards to the name thing, it's quite funny sometimes because sometimes people don't know exactly what to call it, like when they DM. But the funniest one I think I've got is someone introducing themselves and saying, "Hey, Mr. Grizzly." My favorite, Mr. Grizzly.
Thinking that was your surname, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With regards to the arrangement process, I think first and foremost, I always try to transcribe the work to the best of my ability, regardless of how familiar I am, like orally with work. It's always easier to be able to see the actual structure when thinking about it, then arranging those parts, or when considering voicing distribution, or like, between like melody, harmony, accompaniment. After a certain point, the arrangement, it tends to take on like a life of its own after it's found a voice within those various instruments. You have to consider what does and doesn't work in various ranges for each instrument. If the piece in question was originally intended for the flute family at all, then is, for example, the melody line physically possible? Like long slurred passages, or does it need some form of distribution in order to achieve that similar effect? Or it might need altering, to a certain extent. Then there's a case of being able to actually keep things interesting, making sure that certain parts aren't just showing up every now and again to like fill in the gaps. Ultimately, like all the instruments have to be as interesting as possible in the overall mix of the piece and play a meaningful part in it. So it's getting to that point.
Do you ever come across a piece of music on the radio and think, oh, that would be great to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like a sixth sense. You hear something and you just, you take in the ranges, and like you'd be like, this would be perfect on piccolo or something like that, So yeah, that's often the case. Like sometimes it'll just be something you listen to, could be the most random thing ever, and you just at the very least start an idea on it and then see if it works or not.
Well, interesting you say piccolo, because that standing joke is what sounds worse than one piccolo, and it's 4 piccolos. But you've actually done an arrangement for 4 piccolos, and it sounds wonderful.
That one's not my arrangement. That is from a small section of one of the French flute quartets that I'm currently working on. And I thought the opening, I listened to it and I thought, I think that would work well on piccolo. So then I'd started, recording it down, and then it just seemed to work out. But yeah, you listen to these things and you do get a sixth sense for whether it will, potentially work on it.
And yes, listeners, 4 piccolos playing together actually sounds beautiful. Bravo, Barry. Should we move on to another one? Now, I like this one. In fact, I like them all, but there's something quite special about this one and the next one. Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes.
Green Hill Zone. We're going into fantasy land with this, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the very first video game consoles I ever had was a Sega Master System. And depending on which version you got, there was 2 built-in games, and there's Alex the Kid or there was Sonic the Hedgehog. My sister is always asking me to do an arrangement for Alex Kid, so I've got to do that very soon, otherwise she won't be impressed with me. So this is very, I mean, I grew up with this series. I absolutely love it. I've been, used to play it all the time. So I've already got a certain level of familiarity with the tracks even before I started, the arrangement process. And I think that really helps. But there's so much good music in the series that I can not even touch the surface with it. I absolutely love it.
And what's interesting is when you listen to this back as a video game, I actually prefer to listen to the flute music because there's energy in there.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there's a way that we listen to the original music, and in our imagination, we almost expand on that, on what their intention would be if they had no limits whatsoever. And I think that's part of the joy when trying to bring something like this to life, is what can you add to it, or how can you attempt to fulfill the composer's vision even further, because the reality is that they were very restricted in what they could do with the hardware at the time. But it's like a limitation breeds creativity, though, because they're absolute wizards with with what they were able to do with it at the time, especially considering some of this stuff is the late 80s, early 90s, or even earlier than that,
That's when 1 megabyte was actually a big file, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Like floppy disk.
So everybody, Sonic the Hedgehog, Green Hill Zone, arranged and performed by Barry Griffiths. Yeah, you listen to that and you can see Sonic the Hedgehog. It's a bit like watching Wacky Races and seeing all the different people within there, or the Roadrunner. When you hear the sound, you match it with the cartoon or the video.
Funny you said Wacky Races, and then like that just instantly went into my head, like the intro to that.
Wacky Races, that takes me back to my youth, and that's a long time ago, Barry, compared to you.
Penelope Pitstop.
But yeah, Penelope Pitstop, and also Clunk.
Yes. Oh yes, yeah. What was it? Was the caveman? Was that? Oh, was that it? Yeah.
No,
yeah.
He was. I think he was in that group, the Antil Mob, wasn't he? Was he? Yeah, was he the driver or something?
That's the one. Yeah.
God, crikey. God, taking me back a long time. Let's move on to a question by Bart Hungerstone from Texas. Do you know, I like that name, Bart Hungerstone.
Great name.
Right. He says, I'd like to ask Barry about his ability to play so in tune when he is doing these multiple piece recordings. How does he manage this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. The key thing is to listen as much as you can to reference recordings, just listening to music in general, because it really does get that sense of pitch ingrained into you while you're both practicing the piece and then eventually recording it. Being at a piano or keyboard, like, definitely it does help whilst you're going through that process. Sometimes you get a sixth sense for when something isn't quite right, and being able to then quickly validate that speeds up the process.
So when you're recording a part, Barry, do you have something else going on in your ear at the time?
Yeah, so generally, once I have a part layered down, you're monitoring, as it's called. You build it like up in layers. So the nice thing is that once you've set out sort of a project file, you can essentially build it up more organically. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does help.
So
Yeah.
when you're getting to the top part,
Mhm.
I'm assuming you're building it based up, sorry, but sometimes it'll be up down, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It really depends on the piece. Sometimes it is, from the bottom upwards, but then it also then depends on distribution of parts and
Yeah.
what is the most active. It doesn't always go that way, but yeah, it really does help when considering natural in the moment elements like dynamics and phrasing, or like how much vibrato to use, or whatever, because if there's a movement going on in the phrasing, you need all those parts to echo that with equal energy.
So how does that work? Do you look at yourself as well because you're playing and recording?
Yeah.
And if you're doing movement or you're doing sort of some diminuendo or crescendo,
Yeah.
how do you sort of know, bearing in mind the parts you've already recorded?
Well, it's familiarity after sort of practicing a certain part for so long, but also my workflow has kind of changed as of late. So in an audio workstation, I actually plan out projects beforehand, even down to tempo deviations, or anything like that. So I can hear all that going on, and if you plan out the project a certain amount beforehand, it's essentially like having a conductor there with you. So it really does help that kind of sense of playing as a unit, which isn't there if you're just sort of going blind. It's very difficult to do that otherwise.
And on a rough guesstimate, how long does it take to record each track, as in each line of the track? Because,
Each line or part, yeah.
yeah, you're not going to be a one shot man because it's too hard,
It's
isn't it?
it, Yeah, it's difficult, and again, it depends. It really depends on the work in question. There are some that are like that, like you practice it enough, and you build a certain level of confidence with it, and you can just lay down that part and then essentially be done with it. But some of the more complicated ones, yeah, it does take quite a while to give an amount of time. I don't know. It would be too difficult to be to be honest, to nail down. Like if I think back to perhaps the Star Trek one. Gosh, one of those parts might take, all in all, maybe about an hour or something like that for one part, but that's a flute choir. And then once they're all together, then mixing occurs. That's a separate process, like voice balance and panning and whatnot.
It's very complicated. As a classical player, if you're just going to put something up with you and the piano, you're worrying about yourself
Yeah.
playing and mixing with the piano. When there's you playing sometimes 10, 12 parts, there is a hell of a lot of work going on there.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like the actual editing process, or mixing process rather, in and of itself, quite a large task. And then it's not just the audio mixing. Once you find, basically, you want to get to the point then where all of those parts are then mixed down into one file, one usable audio file, right? That's complete, that you could potentially just put out there. But then you take that audio file and then you put it into the video editor, and then you've got all the video elements, that you then have to sync up all of them together, or distribute them visually as well, and then add elements like the score, sync up the highlighter to that, and then what platform are you then exporting it for? Is it for a landscape platform like YouTube, or is it portrait like Instagram or TikTok? Yeah, you both have to shift the elements there, and make it work for each platform. So there's all that, and then finally you get to the point where you export those files, and all of that is reduced into just MP4, and then you you upload it, and then it's like, I've got to do the blog as well. Right, I'll do a little blog now. And then it uploads, and then you just sit back and you have a coffee, and you're like, okay, do it again.
How big is the original file that we're talking about here before you've squashed it down?
The original files, so I record uncompressed on my camera, and so any part on there can be upwards of like 1 gigabyte in size. Once I've mixed down my landscape edit and it's all together, I then have to go through the raw files and delete them all because they take up too much space.
Yes.
It's like a lot of space, and then because I don't need them after that. But yeah, they can grow quite large. I think the Star Trek one in particular, because there's just so many parts. I can't remember how many parts there are in it now, but I think it was like at the very least 12. It was upwards of about 15 gig or more.
I think most people's computers would have stopped working by then, or would have blown up.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
Should we listen to another one, Barry? And again,
Absolutely.
this is a famous one. Super Mario Sunshine, Defino Plaza. Why choose this one, Barry?
I chose this one because although I haven't played this particular game as much, this track has always stood out for me, and it's always been really kind of jolly and bright, and it's one that I thought, you know, it would be fun to attempt. So yeah, it's just a really lively piece.
Super Mario Sunshine, Defino Plaza, arranged and performed by Barry Griffiths. Well, Barry, that's a happy piece, isn't it? Right, let's move on to a question from Geraldine Flume Smith from Johannesburg. What has been your favourite? I don't know if you can answer this because you've done so many, but what has been your favourite piece to arrange and also to play online?
Yes. Now, the very first video game arrangement that I did on my Instagram channel, and it was one of the battle themes from the Pokemon Red and Blue.
Yeah, it was. Crikey, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, it really was. But I remember it like it was yesterday. Like, I remember wondering at the time how the audience might receive video game music on the flute, and I didn't really have the courage to do it before that. Because it was all still very new to me at that time. I hadn't really been doing videos for like too long. So yeah, I was hoping that there was some sense of overlap in interests, and there was, which is great. The piece in question is like really quick paced and features heavy chromaticism in the opening bars, which is like a staple feature of those battle themes. Like that's how the introduction is to, you know, those themes. It was really fun to arrange, and I just distinctly remember that sense of relief when people actually enjoyed it. But the reason I choose that is because it then really opened up the path for me to do more and more from this wonderful world of video game music that I then get to expose people to. They may not have previously been familiar with.
Well, what's really beautiful about all this is you're very accomplished on the instrument, and that comes over in the complexity, but also the simplicity of some of your arrangements. That shouldn't put people off experimenting, should it?
No, absolutely not. And yeah, it's every arrangement and every process to it is different, and oftentimes I just find that the music speaks for itself, and I think a lot of the time that's what I'm listening to. Like, I'm listening to film music, I'm listening to game music. It's my go-to. Like, it's just what I enjoy and what I grew up with. So I find at that point where I'm making that transition and an arrangement of them, that a lot of the times the amazing work that those composers have done, it just speaks for themselves.
Let's do another one. Metroid from Brinstar. Why have you chosen this one?
I chose this one because, first of all, I really love the series. I've played a few games in it, and Super Metroid on the Super Nintendo is one of my favorite games, and it's just incredible start to finish. Such a unique atmosphere to those games. It's like space horror essentially, as much horror that you can instill in games of those eras, but they really managed it. They managed to capture that sense of isolation, but also because you know, I noticed more and more people requesting some tracks from Metroid, and listening over the soundtracks, I realized that this would probably be the most logical one to start with, because the starting point, and it's such a lovely theme as well.
So do you do this by ear, or do you get the score?
So this one was done by ear, because the original on the Nintendo Entertainment System, there's only really sort of 3 channels, you know, of music. So when coming to transcribe that, it's fairly straightforward. but then obviously you can expand it, and I did expand it to more parts, just give it a bit of depth,
Well, let's take a listen. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Let's move on to Joe Allen from London. Ah, we've come home. So it's more of a statement, really. Can you tell that bearded man that we love his music and he brings so much joy in his social media? Oh, how sweet, Joe. So my question comes from a student of mine called Katie, who asks how she would get into posting videos of her playing multiple parts. I haven't the foggiest. It looks very complicated. Over to you, good sir.
First of all, it makes my day to hear that, and it's what keeps me doing what I do. So thank you so much for that kind comment. I really appreciate it. With regards to the multi-recording itself, this is something that I'm asked quite often, and I think there's really two avenues, and it depends what route you want to go down. If you want to be able to do this all on your smartphone, then I believe that there's apps like Acapella, for instance, that directly facilitate that. I'm not too familiar with the app myself, but I've seen others use it with great success. And it is certainly one of the most accessible and cost-effective means of doing it. And at the very least, an extremely handy starting point for those who wish to make multi-video content. If on the other hand, you wish to have like more control over the process creatively, then for myself, I use my laptop, a camera, and microphones when creating my content. I mix the recordings and parts in an audio workstation. So for example, like Logic or Cubase, or there's also free versions of audio workstations as well. I think, you could use Audacity to a great extent if you're very familiar with that. It'd be absolutely fine. And then I edit all of the video and audio elements together in a video editor, such as DaVinci Resolve or Adobe Premiere or anything of the likes, And that's also where I get to add certain visual elements to the score, to the timeline, like scores and highlighters and, certain presentational elements. I mean, for me, for this purpose, I have to recommend DaVinci Resolve, just because it has an extremely generous, free version with practically no limits. And I'm not affiliated with them in any means, or form. It's just what I've been using for the last couple of years now. And I just really enjoy the workflow. And I think, if it's free, and it's just there, you can edit many video layers on top of each other. Also, has its own inbuilt audio workstation called Fairlight that you can record your parts directly into. So in theory, you could actually do the entire editing process from start to finish within that program for free. All that it really requires is that you've got a laptop or computer that's actually capable of running it. So that's a really, really valid option. And I obviously, whenever anyone asks me, what I use, I say I use that, but just because it's it's a joy to use. Like, and I've over the years I've adapted my workflow, and it's quicker and quicker for me to then put out things on there. It does take, there is an initial learning curve, but once you get over that, it's yeah.
So you've taken the simplicity into really into complexity, because not only now are you putting up you playing multiple parts, you're also putting the running score underneath. And if it's a video game, you've got the video game running underneath. It is a really complex visual that you are now creating.
Yeah, I started adding in gameplay footage, partly because the format now, with Instagram and TikTok, it's purely portrait. So adding the elements together, I try to maintain a certain level of continuity. So I've got the video portions of me playing, which is actually still in landscape, the actual video portions, then the score underneath, and those two together make up a square format, which was the old Instagram format. Yeah.
Yep.
And then the gameplay elements above and below that then allow it to be portrait. So it all works out in some form or another.
Yeah, simplicity, complexity. You've turned the complexity now into visual simplicity, because actually it's almost impossible not to want to watch your videos through to the end, because there's so much going on in the reel or in the video.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing with social media as well, because really, where the videos with success, they all grab your attention straight away, or they are just 7 seconds long or something, like I don't know why it's specifically said. I heard that somewhere.
Yeah,
So
7 seconds, yeah.
7 seconds, yeah. To then decide to do, say, a 3-minute piece or something like that, it might not be the most productive, engagement wise, but I try to wrestle with that myself, in that that's what I want to do. I don't want to do a 7 second, I don't think people are going to enjoy a 7-second piece of me playing and then just having to move on. So yeah, if it's the choice between that and then putting out something that's 3 minutes long,
I think a simple fanfare composed by Barry Griffiths, played on a selection of flutes. 7 seconds, made especially for Instagram Reels, TikTok, and all that stuff.
That's a great idea.
Now we got a great piece. Final Fantasy, the place I'll be returning to someday. I like that. The place I'll be returning to someday. There's lots of places I'd love to return to someday, but I'm running out of time. Why choose this piece, Barry?
I chose this piece because Nobuo Uematsu, who's the composer, is a legend in the video game world. His work on the Final Fantasy series is, quite frankly, unparalleled. He has done so much, and for me personally, I think that this number in the series is my favorite soundtrack, has my favorite themes in it, and I think it's his most diverse soundtrack as well. I think he spent a lot of time traveling Europe when composing it, and it's very medieval themed. And I like to think that the name of this piece is somewhere that he particularly liked visiting. I don't know whether this is the case, and that he really wanted to go back there.
I think when you posted it, I said I think I messaged you and said it's very parochial in how it starts. I could almost visualize Henry VIII chucking a chicken leg over his shoulder.
Yes, and I couldn't quite get that imagery out of my.
Barry, he had a beard.
Yes, you did.
Here we go. The place I'll be returning to someday from the Final Fantasy series. You cannot underestimate the beauty and the just the stunning compositions used in video games nowadays, can you?
No, no, it is a different world. And it's almost like there's the rule book. What I think that's what I love about video game music is the rule book is almost thrown out. It's very reactive, because obviously when they're composing it, they're probably giving a set of guidelines, story guidelines, or and then they have to then work with that knowledge that they're given. They're given probably information about characters, settings, and then there's probably a continuous feedback loop between the composer and the director of the game. So it's a completely unique process of creating music, and I think that shows in the material that these composers managed to put out.
Something's just come in, Barry, from a Martin Doherty from Belfast.
Uh-huh.
I put up a post on Instagram this morning just saying, who am I doing a podcast with this morning? George Clooney or some other flute dude? I think I gave the game away last week when I was asking people to come up with questions, because Martin Doherty from Belfast has asked, Clash of Clans. What is that?
Clash of Clans.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think it's a mobile game.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Clash of Clans. All he's put is Clash of Clans. He hasn't even said Clash of Clans music, but just Clash of Clans.
I think off the top of my head, it's a mobile game.
Oh, there's obviously music in that, isn't there? But
yeah.
Well, I've said it now, Martin. Where can you see this taking you, Barry, in the future? How far can you take it? I mean, apart from doing complete symphonies, what can you...
What's the ultimate goal? I don't know. I mean, I'm very content at the moment just that having people enjoying what I'm putting out. I think the ultimate goal is, a form of putting the content out on certain platforms like Spotify and what have you, and having a hub for people to be able to enjoy this on their, wherever they go. Yeah, for me personally, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would love to. For example, we were just talking about those concerts where people play those works. I mean, to me, that's heaven. Like, I love the thought of that.
Is there a way you could actually go and do a masterclass and have 9 parts up, and then you play the 10th, or is there a way? What's the name's doing it? Jacob Collier's doing it, isn't he? When he does all these classes on how to use all these things that he does. Is there something you could do that sort of engages the audience and shows them how to do it?
Yeah, I'm sure there is a way. There must be. I think in terms of for that, you would need to have a plan of how to stage all the elements, have it in sync and have it. But I mean, I am sure that would be possible. I mean, it certainly is possible in that you can monitor your audio when using an audio workstation. You can also sync up video elements with that. So that would be entirely possible.
That'd be an interesting class at the NFA, wouldn't it? A video game music class by yourself. That'll be packed out. Because the generation today is the generation of video games, isn't it? Those that have grown up with video gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be a lot of fun.
So what's the rest of your day?
The rest of my day is looking over holiday season works that I'm going to be recording, and then considering New Year as well, and just looking through existing arrangements, because obviously sometimes I also play arrangements by other people as well. And I've got a recording project at the moment that I'm working on. So yeah, an album that I'm hoping to release early on next year.
Oh, wonderful. An album. Can you tell us more, or is this secret?
Well, it consists of works by French flute composers.
Wow.
They've written for flute quartet. So yeah, I've been working on that over the last few months, and yeah, going to be continuing on that.
Returning back to your roots, good sir.
Absolutely. It never goes away, and it's a beautiful era of music that needs even more exposure, I think.
Well, what's wonderful about you is that the flute repertoire isn't generally as big as other instruments. You've taken sort of modern day online and gaming processing and music, and you're making this available for flute choirs to break away from the classical arrangements.
So at the moment, I'm working out terms with a distribution platform, but that's not currently, they're not available. You want to do it in a manner that's obviously, you know, everyone in terms of like rights and all that is distributed exactly how it should be. Yeah, it's really important, and I think it's often overlooked in the arrangement world, you know, as to what. Yeah, and it needs to be a process that's respected.
Yeah, the copyright is a very important issue. Just like people shouldn't be photocopying, because in photocopying you're not buying the work, and generally composers, they don't earn a good living. So in buying a copy of their music, you are helping to support that artist. So, you know, doing the arrangements, yes, you need to get the copyright approval from whoever owns that copyright. And then once you've got that, then you can put it out.
Yeah, exactly.
With full credits. So we can hopefully in the future find your arrangements being played all over the world.
Hope so. I would absolutely love that. Yes. I'm often asked by flute choirs and, you know, as to how to get those works, and when it's done in the right way, it'll definitely be available.
Well, I applaud your energy, enthusiasm, but also your integrity in wanting to do all this the right way, and that really encompasses you, Barry. Not only a brilliant flute player, a wonderful social media influencer, but you're a genuinely nice guy, and I would just like to thank you so much, not only for the joy that you give to us all. I mean, no doubt your beard will be adorned with light bulbs and festive baubles during the Christmas period, as it normally is.
That's definitely coming up.
Yeah. See, you make us smile. And the thing with Barry, anyone who knows Barry will know that he makes you smile. There is, if you've got a low down day, just go into Grizzly Flute on Instagram or on Facebook, and it will make you smile. It lifts your spirits, because that's what Barry does. So thank you for being Barry.
That's really kind of you to say, Jean-Paul. Thank you.
Now we're going to play out with a very, very famous piece, a very, very popular piece from Harry Potter, Harry's Wondrous World. And you made this really popular because you decided to dress up, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. I haven't done many cosplays during videos, but this is my favorite one to do, and it's you know, it's quick to to get together as well. Fun fact: the glasses, because I'm looking into a computer monitor when playing, I have to poke out the lenses. There's no lenses in the glasses, otherwise they reflect onto the video.
Oh, this is a really, really beautiful piece. Everyone knows it, and it is just, I think it encapsulates Barry, and a beautiful piece to play out too. So Barry, thank you so much for joining us this week, and thank you all for listening. May your week ahead be musically fulfilling, and may your low-C be especially in tune, because mine never is. Bye everybody. Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.